Hello and welcome to another StoryWorks Roundtable. Tonight we are talking about protagonists, how you get them, how to pick one, what goes into making a protagonist. So I think our title's a little wishy-washy here, but we'll get rolling and it'll be great. So Kathryn, why don't you get us going by sharing with us how this idea got posed, the conversation you had that's initiating this topic. Yeah.
Right. So my friend and I were discussing a world she was building a couple of weeks ago, and she was talking about how she had all these great ideas for the world, but she had no idea what the story inside of it was going to be. And so we had a conversation about building the world and then figuring out what the main conflict was, and then figuring out from there who had the most to gain, to lose, the stakes involved, and then from there figuring out who your protagonist was, rather than trying to build a character and insert it into this world and hope that they fit into the conflict, but rather to find the conflict and then figure your protagonist out from there. It's kind of a backdoor approach to figuring out your protagonist, but if you're more into world building first, like that was a conversation that we were having. So just kind of brought up the whole idea of when I'm looking for my protagonist, how do I do it?
Right, that's great. And we did an episode earlier about story ideas, which we can cross-link to in the show notes. And I think we talked about how so often a story begins with a character, or, you know, sometimes you have like I had some flashes of imagery, and Matt, you saw the South American pyramids, and South American, Mexican, where were you?
Yeah, the Mayan pyramids.
The Mayan pyramids, and so that launched a story idea. So this is another way of starting a story with the world building first. But wherever you get your story idea from, you need to have a protagonist who's got to be a part of that world and have stakes. You have to have skin in the game.
Exactly.
Because the story is always told from a character's point of view, right? So you need to have the character in there eventually, maybe not at the beginning, but eventually. Right.
Well, I think you don't have a story if you don't have a point of view character. You've got like a role-playing game, right? Yeah, like if you do all of this great world building for a role-playing game, and then the players come, they become the characters, so they bring themselves to the game. But to tell a story in a novel, you need to build the character that the reader then empathizes with. So it's the perspective, as Matt was saying, but it's also that empathy piece, because the reader is going to identify with the protagonist for the duration of the story. And if we don't relate to, identify with, enjoy, are fascinated by that character, whatever blend of those things this one happens to be, then we aren't going to keep reading the story. Right.
Exactly. And that kind of building that character first sometimes, and this is where my friend and I were kind of talking about, she didn't have a clear picture of a character in her head, but she had a really clear picture of the world and kind of the good versus evil battle that was going on, but she didn't have like a main central character. And so this was where I was like, you know, maybe for you the conflict comes first, and then figuring out you know, who has the most stakes and who is the most interesting person that a reader can really grab a hold of is the way to do it, rather than character first, like we've talked about previously.
Right, but those stakes need to be really personal. So if you're doing an epic story, the person with the most to lose, the most stakes, might be like the king, or somebody who has the most material wealth, the most land, the most whatever title, you know, to lose. But the character who's the best character in the story might be a lowly servant, or might be, you know, a shepherdess, or who knows. So those stakes have to be thought of on a deeply personal, intimate level, you know. So the greatest stakes aren't just the biggest physical, you know, tangible stakes.
So it's going to take more digging than just who in this world has the most at stake, but more like in the story that you want to tell, who has the best storyline, the best growth, the best potential for creating something that a reader can really care about.
Yeah, absolutely. You go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to bring up Nick from The Great Gatsby, right? What's his last name? Carraway. Carraway. You mentioned this in that Facebook Live thing you did last week.
Right.
In that, Gatsby may be the most interesting character probably in that story, right? Gatsby's definitely the most interesting one because he's got the mystery about him.
Right.
But Nick had to tell that story. He was the only one in a position to see both sides of it. Right? He was the only one that could tell the story. But do you think that he has the most at stake in that story? I mean, if you think about it, like maybe Gatsby has the most at stake in that story. He lost everything at the end.
Well, he lost his life.
Exactly.
I mean, maybe Daisy lost more than Gatsby because Gatsby died, so it's over for him. Daisy lost her escape, her freedom, her lover, her hope for the future, for change, but Nick is the one who had to tell that story because his stakes were personal and immediate. And intimate as well. He changed. He's the one who was so deeply and profoundly moved by Gatsby's story that he had to go home and rest in a sanatorium, So his stakes were the catalyst for his personal change. He'll never be the same again. Gatsby's done with, and Daisy didn't change. She had no evolution. She went off with her husband and her child and, kept being a rich socialite. So that's why Nick is the one who had to tell that story. Right. It was his stakes that created change.
So if you go back to it, I think that the protagonist that you choose has to be the only one who could possibly tell that story. Right?
Absolutely.
And I think your friend might actually be in a really good position because she could invent or pick the best person, right? She didn't come into that story thinking, "Oh, I really love this character. I had to tell this story from this character's perspective." And it's happened to a lot of people where the most interesting character, the one that they're fascinated by, is not the right person to tell that story.
Right.
Alida's nodding because she edits a lot of manuscripts, and I'm
That's
sure,
right.
especially when it comes to those epic fantasies that have multiple viewpoint characters. How do you pick which one's the protagonist, right? It's the one person who has to tell that story, even if it's told from multiple points of view. There's always one.
Yes, and I've told writers this. Fortunately, I've never told anyone go rewrite your entire book with a new character because you just got this all wrong. But oftentimes I see multiple POVs where they've got the wrong character telling us part of the story, and that action really belongs to someone else. It's someone else's stakes. It's someone else's viewpoint that the reader's going to engage with. And so as the writer, we really need to keep stepping back from the work because it's easy to get in the flow, which is a great experience for us, but doesn't necessarily lead to the best story or best experience for the writer, and do a little analysis. Whose moment is this? Who's going to be changed? And who does the reader really care about? Who are we invested with? And it's often like secondary characters who are given minor points of view that they shouldn't even have, who end up doing something in the plot, and then the effect is, well, okay, I don't really care about that. So you need to take that action away from those characters, get rid of their point of view, and then keep it with the protagonist.
Yeah, which is why I think a lot of the times first person singular point of view novels tend to be stronger, just like on the whole, than multiple point of view novels, right? Because you know who the main character is, you know who the protagonist is, you get really invested with them, and they always change.
Yes,
it's a good book. I just read this great book by Jim Butcher called It was his new steampunk novel, The Aeronaut's Windlass, right? And it's big epic fantasy with multiple point of view characters, but I know who the protagonist was, right? There's no question reading that who the protagonist was. So, yeah. And he pulled it off great with multiple point of view characters, but you know who the protagonist is.
Right.
And it's not always the person who starts the first chapter.
Really? Interesting. Yeah. So I want to go back to Kathryn's friend in the world building. And Matt, you said that she would be in a great position to find the character with the most at stake. And I think we should touch on how to do that. And you've got to know what story you want to tell. So if you've got this epic world and warring sides, you've got to figure out what your theme is. What is the story about? Because if your story is about sacrifice, well, who's going to sacrifice what? Is it going to be a mother who sacrifices her son to war? Is it going to be, about a father protecting? Is it on what scale? And to make it relatable and personal, we have to get down into the microcosm of being human. It can't all be like we're up here looking at a board game. We've got to be down on the ground with the characters. So before you know who's got the most to lose, you need to know what kind of story you're telling.
Right.
Yeah. Like what genre or like what happens to the character.
Right. Well, and you could have any theme in any genre. It could be a space opera with the theme of sacrifice or love, or, that could be a Western, that could be a literary novel. So within the parameters of the world, you've got to get at the themes of what it means to be a human. So what human theme are you going to write about? And then that gives you a sense of personal stakes. It's not just somebody's going to get shot. It's somebody's going to get shot, and this has meaning because this character, right? And that's what the reader relates to. So you got to really bring it in.
I wonder sometimes if it might be easier to find your antagonist first, like your antagonistic force and who that is, and then from there work around the protagonist. That's a question. I'm not sure.
Well, I've never done it. I've never conceived of... Gosh.
Yeah, me either.
So I just wonder if you know who they're going up against and what you want the end result of the story to be for said antagonist, if you might be able to work your way backwards. This is this whole episode's about working backwards.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I mean, that makes sense to me. Like, you'll know how the character changes if you start at the end of the book and you know what change you want to bring about, right?
Mm-hmm.
It seems like to me, starting with your antagonist seems like another way to look at the same sort of thing, right? Like, start at the end. Right. Go back.
Right. Well, you do, you can also start with the climax and then work your way toward it. And I think, so like with Skog Hall, I knew I was telling a ghost story, so my antagonist was going to have to be a ghost. Okay, that's pretty easy. So I need a haunted house. I need a protagonist. But who is the ghost? Why do we care about the ghost? What does the ghost want of my protagonist? So then it was still about drilling down and getting very, very specific. And then these themes emerge during that process of drilling down. So it's not just about Jess getting run out of her house by a ghost. It's about the ghost was a woman who was killed by a Vietnam veteran who had PTSD. So then all of these themes emerge with war and what it does to the psyche and, healthcare and all kinds of stuff. But all of those larger ideas blossomed out of the process of finding out who my protagonist is, who my antagonist is as well, and what's at stake between them? Who's got what to lose? Why are they in this set of circumstances? What is the world around them all about?
I just want to be like, it is not easy. A lot of process that goes
Sounds simple.
I know.
But you're right. It's not easy.
But that's good. I mean, to think about finding your protagonist isn't just saying, I have this girl and she's this old and she's got brown hair and now she's going to be the protagonist of my book, you have to actually take the time to, like you said, examine the deeper themes and look at your story as a whole and decide whether or not that girl really is the person who can tell that story with the best effect.
Right.
So drill down, drill down, drill down, drill down, drill down.
Right. And I think we're talking a lot about a chicken and the egg issue. Like, does it matter whether you start with your protagonist or your antagonist or your opening or your climax or your theme, or do you let your themes emerge? And I think for me, it's really all of the above. And that's why, as I know we've talked about before, my books always start with a journal, because I get all of these ideas and I put them all on paper, and then there's an organization process and a process of discovery before I'm even ready to start writing scenes.
Right.
Yeah. That's not a tall order. All of the above.
No, it's easy. Come on, people.
Yeah.
Get on it.
Well, and I think it's encouraging to know that you don't have to start with your protagonist. Like, your story doesn't have to start there. Like, you can start anywhere that idea comes from. Like, we talked about ideas before and the places that they've come, and just because you started with a world or a conflict or this really cool, vision of what you infigured just one scene or something, like, you can work your way to finding a really good story and a really strong protagonist no matter where your idea comes from.
Right, you can, but I do want to point out that we're really talking about pre-writing. Like, don't sit down to write a book and write 100 pages without knowing who your protagonist is. This is the development process that happens when you're journaling, when you're storyboarding, when you're doing all of that great discovery stuff before you actually produce a book. So
right.
I feel like Writers Anonymous, raise your hand if you've ever written 100 pages
without knowing who your protagonist is. Right.
I've done that.
And what happened next?
Track.
They groan. They find a wall to bang the head upon. Yeah, I don't think I've done that, but I have taken. So Saving Annabelle was a short story. Then it was a very long short story. Then it was a play. Then it was a novel. I totally rewrote. So I've definitely done my share of discovery on the page and felt the pain of it.
Yes.
Which wasn't a bad thing. It's all learning and it's all craft and it's all fun, but it is time consuming as well. Cool. Any final thoughts as we wrap this up?
You mentioned pre-writing. I just want to point out that pre-writing is not the same as outlining. So even if you're a pantser, you can still do pre-writing. Right.
Absolutely good point. That's right. I feel like I should shake my finger. Okay, you pantsers, get out your journal.
Yeah. Yep. Or voice recorder, whatever works for you.
Right. Definitely. You don't have to be a Luddite like me and Kathryn.
Luddites.
Yep. Luddites Anonymous.
They make really pretty journals, so.
Yeah, and you can buy stickers.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure I'm only not like that because my handwriting is atrocious.
There you go. That'll do it.
What does that say?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
All right. Great. Well, this has been another Storyworks Roundtable. Thank you so much for watching, and please join the conversation. We are on the Storyworks Writers Facebook group.